Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review. Today I'm reviewing the next entry in the Planet of the Apes series, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Now it has a 6.0 on IMDb, and through the normal way I cannot check what its reception on Rotten Tomatoes is, because for some reason its Rotten Tomatoes page is not opening at this time. I don't know if it doesn't have one, or it's deleted, or just my thing is not doing it. By the time if this is uploaded, if I can get it to work, I'll probably put it in the description box. But this is definitely another great sequel. Not as great, I don't think it's as great as Escape, but I still think it's another worthy sequel, because like Escape, it does deal with then contemporary issues. Because in this film you can see a little bit of the civil rights movement in there, along with slavery, and also a little bit, mostly towards the end, but you can tell it's very subtle throughout the rest of the film, the whole issue of humans and their relationship with the other great apes, chimps, gorillas, and orangutans. Now, one thing they mentioned on those little brief featurette at the beginning of the VHS is that parts of the scenes later in the film were inspired by the Watts riots, and as one of the people said at the time, you couldn't make a film with the protagonist being the guy that instigates the Watts riots, but you can make a film with a chimp that starts a riot similar. So, like he said, great science fiction is able to, like any great science fiction, you comment on contemporary issues, and people can see and do what they will, excuse me. The film was directed by J. Lee Thompson, and it's written by Paul Den. And J. Lee Thompson, other films he directed Ice Cold and Alex, the original Cape Fear. After this he also directed Battle for the Planet of the Apes, Huckleberry Finn in '74, The White Buffalo, The Evil That Men Do in '84, King Solomon's Mines in 1985, Death Wish 4 in '87, Firewalker. His last film was in '89, Kinjit, Forbidden Subjects. He has a long filmography. His first film was in '50, so an almost 40-year career. I haven't seen the rest of his films, but I've heard good things about King Solomon's Mines, if that's the same one I'm thinking of. I'd say of the ape films, this is definitely his better one. Now, the music is by Tom Scott, and while not as good as Goldsmith's scores, it's a score that fits the tone of the film. Now, the film stars Roddy McDowall, this time as Caesars, since offspring usually take some resemblance of their parents, or take after their parents. That'd be better wording. I can buy him playing another character. We got Don Murray as Governor Beck, our antagonist. Ricardo Montalban returns as Armando in a brief cameo. Natalie Trudy as Lisa. Harry Rhodes plays the character McDonald. Severn Dalden plays Culp. We got other actors in here. We got John Randolph, H.M. Wynant, Paul Comey, Gordon Jump, just minor ones. Now, before I get into this film, I gotta discuss something I didn't bring up when I reviewed the previous film, and it's a minor spoiler for that if you haven't seen Escape yet. Just a warning. One of the things we find out in Escape, and this is a minor retcon, and you can also say it's a revelation because they never mentioned it in the original film, is that some of the apes at least know a little bit about the prehistory of Earth. I'm guessing it's probably laid down in the Forbidden Secret Scrolls that only high-ranking people like Zaius had access to, and then of course Cornelius and Zira, probably when Zaius left, or maybe even in between 1 and 2, because it looked like Zaius is on a friendlier terms with them in 2 than he was at the end of 1, or maybe, you know, he's come to his senses a little bit, and was probably just putting on an act in front of the gorillas, who knows. Well, it seems that what they know about it is that in the 70s, a plague hit the Earth that caused all the cats and dogs to die. And of course, man did not want to be without its pets, so it turned to simians, and eventually, simians being primates, and eventually chimps, orangutans, and gorillas were pets, then servants, and then by the time this film takes place, slaves. They eventually uprose, and you can see in this film the beginning of the uprising, and of course we eventually got the world we saw in the first film, where man is basically in the position that they had apes at. Now, the film starts in 1991, where we see Armando and Caesar, and it's years later. Caesar's now grown up, the disease has come, and apes are now slaves. Now, this is the first time Caesar has been out among other people and other apes, so he's a little appalled at what he sees. And after one particularly brutal incident, he basically calls them rotten human bastards, outing himself a little bit. He manages to escape, and Armando has to go clear things up, and he eventually dies rather than betray Caesar. Caesar follows Armando's backup plan and stows away aboard a container ship on a cage that has orangutans in it, which that eventually comes back to bite him later. He's eventually sold and becomes the property of Governor Beck, and he's assigned a position by McDonald. Now, after he finds out about Armando, Caesar's had enough, and he begins to organize the apes, and eventually by the end of the movie he's helped them uprise. Now, continuity speaking, this makes me wonder, is this supposed to be a slightly altered timeline from what the original film had? Now, the reason I say that is that in the previous film they mentioned that the first ape that said no was one named Aldo, if I remember the name right, and that he's the one that started all this, that eventually went to that. But as in this film, we see it's Caesar who did it. Could it be that the original films was a different timeline, where it was years later, centuries later, that Aldo did it? Which centuries would give the apes enough time to, at least one of them, gain the intelligence to do this? Or did Caesar do it with the whole timeline thing, with the whole time travel thing, and then through rewriting of history, it was changed to Aldo, and he was changed to an unknown ape species? Because if I remember right, they don't mention what type of ape he was in the first film, but I'm going to guess probably he was going to be a chimp. But I don't think it really matters anyway. Probably would be an orangutan, given how Zeus is, but that's just how pompous he is. Now, I choose to view that this film, personally, I view it as it being a secondary timeline, slightly different than the original film. I know that at the end of the next film that teardrop we see in the statue of Caesar is supposed to indicate that society eventually failed, but I look at it with a more optimistic view that in this timeline humans and apes were able to coexist, and most likely nuclear war in the future with the bomb from the second film never happened. But that's just my viewpoint on it. Take that what you will. I don't know if I'll elaborate on that in the next film. Now, this film did have some controversy other than what would be the obvious, the stuff that this film has dealt with, the whole humans being related to apes and ape uprising thing, and that is the level of violence in the film. Because of the uprising, obviously the apes are going to be shooting humans, humans are going to be shooting apes, it's going to be a lot of violence. And the initial cut actually had to be edited down, because since this was before the PG-13 rating, if it went above a PG, it was going to get an R. And so to appease the censors, they cut out a lot of stuff. And you can tell that the film is toned down a little bit. It doesn't really bother it in the fighting scenes. It just makes me wonder what they really cut out. Like, was it... I heard on the VHS they mentioned gore, so it was probably blood squibs and stuff. Which, it'd be interesting. I know there's an extended cut on the Blu-ray they set out a couple years ago. It has all but one thing put back into the film. So it makes me wonder how those uprising scenes will look with that stuff put back into the film. Probably will help it a little bit. I know one scene they didn't put back in was a pre-credit sequence where a chimpanzee escapes. He's hunted down by ape control, and when they catch him, they see that he had welts all over his body. That scene's mentioned in the final film, but not seen. I think it'd probably be a little stronger if we see it, because then you'd probably make McDonald's point a little bit more valid. Which, of course, makes me wonder if they cast McDonald's an actor intentionally. My guess is, considering some of his dialogue in the film, they probably did. And that's probably one of the things about slavery in the film that's not so subtle, because it's a African-American actor doing it. But it makes sense, and it kind of goes along with the whole thing, and I guess that's why you okay, that's the way he feels about why they're treating the apes that way, but it makes us like the character. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just not very subtle. And of course, one thing is that Beck is played by a white actor. That one, but That one I think is just a little weird, and someone could probably see something racist in that. I don't. I'm just something I have to bring up because the way Beck's written, he could have been a Chinese actor. He could have been another black actor. Could have been a blue Navi actor. It wouldn't have mattered because of how the character is written. He could be anyone. He could have been a woman. That would have been a little interesting. A woman as Beck. Of course, it would have made the original ending where Beck gets beaten to death by the apes a little bit more violent. Because that's actually what happened in the original ending, and it didn't test well, so when they went back and re-edited the film, they redid the ending to where, after he does the whole speech and they're about to beat the crap out of Beck with the guns, he decides to stop it. And I actually do like this speech, even though you can tell by watching the scene that it really is obviously edited. Here is Caesar's speech. But now we will put away our hatred. Now we will put down our weapons. We have passed through the night of the fires, and those who were our masters are now our servants. And we, who are not human, can afford to be humane. Destiny is the will of God, and if it is man's destiny to be dominated, it is God's will that he will be dominated with compassion and understanding. So cast out your vengeance. Tonight we have seen the birth of the planet of the apes. That last part's not entirely true, but good point. Now, other than the censorship, I think this actually makes sense from a character perspective because the chimps have always seemed the most intellectual of the three apes in this series, so if the Rising was started by a chimp, it would make sense that he wouldn't want a full-on bloodbath, only fighting when necessary. And killing Beck really isn't necessary. Granted, he's ordered a lot of atrocities against apes, but he's been beaten, he's been humbled, so killing him with blunt force like that really is overkill, especially with what McDonald and him have talked about. Now, the film has the lowest budget apparently out of any of the series. It has a $1.7 million budget, but it doesn't really feel that way. I mean, Beneath, you could tell it has a lower budget than the first film. Escape did as well, but considering it had a contemporary setting, it didn't really feel that way, especially since the majority of the film there's only 2 apes. This one there's more apes, but you don't really get that feeling. Granted, in certain scenes you could probably tell in the background they have characters wearing ape masks like in Beneath, but there's also a lot of usage of the famous ape makeup. Of course, by this time they probably had plenty laying around. They probably used some of the same extras, so they didn't really have to do new molds to faces. McDowell, they just reused his stuff probably. And they probably also had a lot of props and stuff left over from the previous film, so just reuse props. And just shoot in locations that had a futuristic look. Let's see. A primary location that they shot in was Century City, Los Angeles. And let's see, a lot of the props were like, some of them were taken from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, the Time Tunnel, and other stuff. And it made almost $10 million, which that's a pretty good sized profit for the day. I don't know what the inflation rate would be, but if you can make a movie that is blockbuster, is supposed to be a blockbuster before there were blockbusters on a not even $2 million budget, then $9 million, then an almost $10 million gross is pretty substantial. That'd probably be like at least $100 million gross today, at least comparatively. I guess that's just my guess with inflation. Now, like Escape, this definitely gets my recommendation, though I would recommend Escape first if you haven't seen any of the Ape sequels. Even though the main character is played by the same actor from the previous film, McDowell gives a different performance as Caesar. You can tell it's a totally different character. At first he's naive, but by the end of the film he really sees that his brethren need his help, and that humans, while not fully bad, they can't be allowed the full reign that they have had, especially now that they're treating apes as their servants when they are their closest living relatives, and that's something Beck openly admits at the end of the film. And he's a very interesting character, and this carries on to the next film, which I haven't seen in a while, but I remember certain things about it, and I remember still liking him. Anyway, my rating for Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, I give it a 4 out of 5 stars, and obviously this is my second favorite of the sequels. Like I've said before, it comes with my recommendation Of course, after Escape, of course, after the original.